Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for watching from wherever you're watching. Thank you for listening from wherever you're listening all around. Tom Mukwana, my co-host, has been away for some time. Tom, can you please just constantly explain to everybody why you are constantly missing, absenting yourself from work?
See, I didn't absent myself from work, first
Really?
of all. That's crazy coming from my boss. But second of all, I had to handle an issue at home in Butere.
Can I say what the issue? I'm itching to say it.
You can say it, it's fine.
It's okay. Tom went to see his mom. He's a good boy.
Yeah. So I went to see my grandmom and mom. And also they had something that they planned prior to the week of Easter. Yeah. So I had to go and attend to that. Right. But yeah, I'm glad to be back. Mama
Tom, hello, hi.
She's probably watching this.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
That's great. And first time on the big picture, but certainly not a new face to that big investigation that just came out this morning from BBC Africa Eye, Blood Parliament. And of course, there's been that trip that concluded recently, the state visit by President William Ruto to China and what that portends. But first, of state officials, specifically the police, in facilitating Title D, admitting to certain things we moved to, the residents there are sitting in quite a bit of a conundrum, is under question, and the county has a lot to answer for. That series, that episode of Didn't Miss It.
In the next episode,
what were Islands?
Nairobi's old estates are turning into a battlefield.
43 families from Woodley Estate are tonight counting losses.
The county government of Nairobi have the titles for Ofafa Jericho, Jericho Lumumba, Ofafa Maringo, and Maringo or not.
Nani walikaa chini
hakukuwa na title deed isipokuwa ni hicho kijikitabu ambacho kilikuwa na maelezo kwa upande wa nyuma.
As plans to demolish these estates gather momentum, who really wins?
Lack of transparency. Yani ukora ni mingi sana hii Nairobi.
Forty-three families from Woodley Estate are tonight counting losses.
The county government of Nairobi have the titles for Ofafa Jericho, Jericho Lumumba, Ofafa Maringo, and Maringo or not.
Nani walikaa chini wakasema ianze Jericho?
Tuliahidiwa ya kwamba baada ya miaka 25 hizi nyumba zitakuwa zetu.
Hakukuwa na title deed isipokuwa ni hicho kijikitabu ambacho kilikuwa.
And what is the true cost of redevelopment?
There are a lot of challenges. Key amongst them is a total lack of transparency. Yani ukora ni mingi sana.
All right, Title Deals, episode 2, season 2. As you've seen, we've had to play it thrice just so that you can get exactly what the topic is. But we're looking into the development of the land and people there who've lived there for decades, feeling under in BBC Africa Eye. BBC Africa Eye have produced what is at 3:30 p.m. outside of Kenya's National Assembly, where 3 people was exposing who specifically, out of a crowd of numerous security officers, shot and killed 3 individuals. And the surprising bits about it is that when you watched it, what did you think of initially? Like, what was...
Okay, I mean, let me just say, not to be gratuitous, but I watched it twice. Once at home in the morning, 33 minutes of it, and then again, I watched it with my colleagues in the office, because on that same day, some of these events were being covered live, not in as much detail. I'm not going the right way. But this is what I saw. I think for me, when I first started, I thought, okay, are we rehashing the thing? And everybody's known about the deaths that took place and the refusal to yield, even when the public demand is sensible and peaceful. But no, I mean, what I've seen is, to me, it tells me that, yes, minutes gave us so much detail using open source information to actually tell us that there was a lot of malice in the way this has been done. There was restraint by this crowd, of course. Some of the breaches were not necessarily legal. There was restraint, completely brutal.
You know, you say something super important there, that we are being ground down in an effort to make us forget.
Yes.
What out of this past year and in our country about even things that are as consequential as something like this? Is this something that you...
Government comes, first starts by drawing a hard line. Which is, look, these guys are rogues and all that, right? And we saw for all those guys, one was the guy in a white gown, who's a butcher, has his own business. So this is not an idle person waiting to be hired to come and cause mayhem in the streets of Nairobi. The other was a university student. And then there was this quick to actually leave an ongoing business, an ongoing thing, to come to the streets to tell government, guys, listen to what people say, let's have a conversation. But then, of course, there's the turnaround. We'll try and examine what happened here to ensure that any unfair treatment, illegal behavior, the state's agencies are just freezing everything. So one person conceded something when it began, and then after that, sometimes they just grind us by saying, in which the hands of the police, and specifically politicians, everybody tells you, police including, the thing is just to test our stamina, the fact that we'll have to move, we'll get away with it, and that impunity as this occasion did. Nobody's even asked to, quote unquote, step aside until something happens. And so that means that there's a confidence and there's a core people in the public sector, especially, quote unquote, those security people who think, you can't touch us.
Yeah. Tom, you were out there that day, on the 25th of June. I recall us having a conversation, you know, sometime after, and you telling me about hearing the gunfire. Where were you when those gunshots rang out? And looking at what the BBC has done, and looking back to, you know, where you were, what crosses your mind? What comes up? What memory?
Because the Kenyan public has been thirsty for public interest journalism at a large scale for a very long time. You understand? And African Census does that on a content by content basis, but we need a lot more people because we have limited resources, how much we can do at the same time. Like there's title deals happening and there's a bunch of other things happening. But it's good when such journalism is given that big of a platform because BBC has a global platform. So I feel good that that type of journalism is being done, and being somebody who is conversant with OSINT research, I know how big of a moment this is, not only in Kenya, but Africa in general for OSINT reporting. Yes, it's a big, big moment. But then that aside, your first question was, how did I feel?
Yeah, how did you feel?
Hearing those gunshots in that clip, it reminded me of what I had on that day. The gunshots, the chorus that people were singing, reject, reject, and Twende Bunge, and that defiance, it reminds me of that. But also I remember just feeling chills, hearing that many gunshots at the same time. I remember even sending an audio of those few minutes after breach of parliament
to our WhatsApp group.
And just telling you that this is incredible. I've never had anything like this. But what stuck out for me was something that hasn't been done in a lot of the reporting around the protests. You know that there was an IT expert, and you know that there was a student, and you know that there was a butcher who was murdered outside parliament. A lot of the times we like to throw the word protests around. Too many protesters, 6 protesters, 62 protesters were killed. But then for once, on a mainstream level, we're not having burials of these people being covered only, but we have the regular videos of them living life. Because for Eric Shieni, I think they had a video of him singing Yashinsky's song. And that silence of his voice speaking, that just pierces your soul, right?
I'm telling you, it was haunting.
Yeah.
It was haunting. No, you know why it was haunting for me? Because Eric, he was a university student, but he was a student of economics. And each of them had this very interesting tie-in to the economy of the country and the debate at the time. And all of them get shot down right in front of Parliament. The butcher, leaving a business, as you said, right? The coder and Sunday school teacher. Like coming to, what goes through the mind of a person who teaches Sunday school to be there? You know? And that's what for me really stuck out about the documentary, like, you know, is something that we ought to remember, and we really ought to dig into and recall. You know, I remember where I was. So I wasn't in the country, right? And I was maybe about 8 hours behind you guys. And seeing when that thing happened, when the gunshots rang out, and almost immediately after, you see the body of the gentleman who was wearing white on the ground. And I just grabbed my phone and I tweeted, I'm like, oh my God, these guys have killed people right outside Parliament. It was a pivotal moment. I never thought that we would sink to that level. And this is what worries me about this entire moment. I agree with you, Tom. I also loved that there was the humanizing of the people who died, and reminding people that these ones that I picked up on was the member comes out and invokes the genocide, right? The Rwanda genocide as being an example where bad reporting leads to poor consequences. I wonder how willfully blind someone can be to say something about that, where there was this general nationwide.
So let me say something before I come to Honorable Kaluma. So the first thing is, you know, one of the reasons why this can't fail to touch you about the fact that we live in a society that's where public goods, which is security, is delivered in a very medieval sense, is for all the 3 cases that BBC showed. So that's one. They were not a threat to anybody in security.
Exactly.
They were not holding any weapons in their hands. So that's the first atrocity. The second one is this. Eric, who was shot last, threatening.
Exactly.
So it just tells you how our sense about how security is provided in this country, or rather responding to protests and all that, is a message. We kill people and splatter blood on the streets and people's brains. So that's the first thing. We just, the atrocity in itself tells you how we take as normal government killing citizens in the name of law enforcement. So that's the first. But the other, now coming to Honorable Kaluma, and I don't know Honorable Kaluma on a personal level. I don't.
Neither do I.
But if you watched the movie, rather these 33 minutes, and then you saw his statements, you doubt his sanity. I say this with the utmost respect. Very high-end things, especially Eric's was a very high-end military priest to catch it the way he did, you know, with one shot. So, question that brings him to look, we need to look at this again, and the executive owes us an explanation. Speaks like
this is a real moment for national reckoning about what exactly took place. Did you see anything in terms of coordinated authentic behavior?
Yeah, but I think it's important to point out that GDP, I think that's the name he uses, Kaluma, he's actually purportedly supposed to represent Kenyans. The same Kenyans who were murdered outside Parliament. So yeah, he is speaking like an insane man if you look at it from that point of view. But the attacks that we've seen haven't come from him alone. It's other people, governments, people who would call quote-unquote government stooges. People who will stand for the government through anything, even the worst of atrocities. A few, actually, the docu launched late in the night, early in the morning, right? Around 2 in the night. And by 7, 8 in the morning, there was a hashtag that was around 3,000 tweets already saying Babu Owino. And to be fair, it's a credible case that is put against documentary about the government shooting its own people.
All of this is resurrected.
Suddenly there are thousands of tweets calling for DJ Volves. When this conversation just started after the BBC documentary, just it tells us what you already know.
And you know, suffice to say, there's a lot to unpack from that documentary, and there's not the answers that we require 1 year later that, you know, a media house would have to do this. And honestly, my congratulations to the BBC for doing this. We'd have loved to, we can't say for us to have this conversation and to talk amongst ourselves as Kenyans, right? Now, I hate to move on from this, but we really had an interesting week last week. Aside from the things that happened locally, there was also quite a bit happening, you know, on foreign soil, with President William Ruto visiting China and signing deals worth about, rundown of them, $430 million, excuse me, from the Zonken Group, a chicken farm. And if you notice, each one of them, apparel group, 20 million to set up manufacturing, $230 million. But there's two that I feel are interesting. The other one we'll talk about a little later. But Kwame, when you saw that, there's been divided of, numerous circles in Kenya. You're hearing very positive things about the persistence of William Ruto in getting this deal done, both the SGR deal as well as our debt binge over the past now 14 years. What's your take? Putting ourselves in danger.
The first statement that I saw was a statement that was issued, the official press release after the meeting, which was on Friday last week, right, on 25th. So that was the first statement that I saw. And then the second statement was the one issued by State House in Kenya, which is the official one. And those statements are very different. I mean, if you look at it, the first was a 6-page statement, and it talks about, it's a very China-driven statement. So, for instance, Chinese appear 68 times, Kenya 38. So if democracy 0. And the first paragraph in that statement, was very interesting because it actually talks about Kenya, quote unquote, my words, throwing Taiwan under the bus, because it says we reassert China's one China policy, including acceding to the fact that China should take any mechanisms, any or something that struck us as very interesting is we've had a very balanced foreign policy in Kenya. Many people call it strategic with ambiguity. Yeah. And if you look at just 3 years ago, Kenya shone by having Kenya's representative to the United Nations speak unequivocal, right? And we were speaking about Russia invading Ukraine, and Kenya was of. In addition to the fact that in the 21st century, they believe in arms as one way of persuading, and now saying that, look, Taiwanese, you guys are on your own, and it's one thing China. So this thing here, there'll be investments here, there'll be a few other things. There's the panda bonds and all of it was just more attuned towards jobs, without talking about the political concessions that have been made. So that's the first thing about that. It was a very aggressive statement, the Chinese one. That's the first thing. And then the second one is, yes, we're extending the standard gauge railway loans is, one, they have zero transparency. Remember, even after a presidential commitment, the courts asked for the ministry to issue that statement, the agreement, which has not been done to date. But here we have another clever Kenyan president going out there, issuing to a future generation and a future administration, because it's not all going to be paid for within his term. So that means we've encumbered ourselves again. It's not enough to say it's going to cost $3 billion. The transaction details, which is how much are you paying, what's the duration, and what are the terms of that loan. So we are repeating the same mistakes, except now giving it more.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is that China looks like it's de-risking itself off of any possibility of default. And in as much as, I think the first SGR were about to retire that loan. And it, technically speaking, we should be able to take on more debt, given that we are retiring this loan. But laws, essentially to a first land along the railway line went through the roof. But then again, very long on polish, to use your words, very, very short on detail. And if you're going to touch something as sensitive as land from that statement.
For me, it was the SGR loan, and reading Kwame's work, actually, he calls a lot of these projects white elephant projects. You're guilty of that, right? So he does call them white elephant projects, and you put up a case against them looking at the numbers and the actual amounts that would cost these projects if they were done with integrity. But also at the same time, I've had this conversation of the Chinese debt trap. And I don't know how you feel about that, because I'm looking at it from a different perspective of is it actually a debt trap, or are we just terrible at managing our finances? I don't know where you both stand with that, but I feel it's more the other part than it is a Chinese problem. Because because just to wrap this up, right? The Center for Global Development did have huge NDAs on them, actually which means that actually the country, if it does things rightly, wins.
But why don't you just declare that in an agreement? So why is it that we are I think we are 3/4, and here we have gone into into a second one. So yes, that's true. But the point about the debt trap, I was one of, and often it would be a tricky thing to actually, that you have a debt problem, you have to pay, and therefore you're squeezing everybody, and then people say, look, these taxes have gone too far.
Yeah.
If you see the concessions that Kenya made, we say we are going to support multilateralism, which is good for small countries such as Kenya. And then on the other side, we are saying we are going to develop a multipolar world where China is cutting out its own sphere of influence. Still just the disadvantage of Kenyan citizens.
And you know that all of these declarations are made, his plane turns around. I found it very, I mean, we were very quick on the draw in terms of around this tariff issue. And the tariff issue is not just a tariff issue, we all know that, right? These are the first sort of throes or pangs, you know, of pain as we move into a more multipolar world, right? In which China has ascending dominance. And so I guess Kenya is making its bet, but making its bet a little too close to our foreign policy is important, right? The other thing that concerned me was the investment in Kenya's digital infrastructure. Now, again, technically speaking, China are, bar maybe 1 or 2 states, the most proficient at deploying digital infrastructure to the advantage of the country. Old garden that used to be China, you know, from Chinese factories, etc., that tell you that there's a very managed, the now steady drumbeat of public officials who have been calling on the government to, you know, could be something. Obviously, it hasn't yet happened, right? But it could be something that sets us down a very, very dangerous path. A very dangerous path. Such a time when the country's government has, if there ever was a trust quotient, it would be way, way down, right? So that sort of like, you know, prick your ears up when you saw...
Again, the first 6-page statement issued by the Chinese side, which was issued as part of the official communique. One of the things that it said that really worried me towards the end was that every country must interpret human rights needs. Now, I paraphrase. According to its own conditions.
That's incredible.
And we've always accepted that human rights actually have a global benchmark. So when you look at that, against the fact that we have a government with possibly the lowest credibility any government has ever had, and then secondly, look back at the fact that last year there was a contest between Kenyans and their government across what, and then thirdly, in China, government surveillance is almost taken as a given. And yet we have constitutional rights here. So yes, it's just a steep slope, right? Going down a slope that we might, I mean, Kenyan citizens should be very, very careful, very, very careful about. So that's in addition to some of this Chinese infrastructure, Africa, because of their cost competitiveness. And that's a nice thing. But the other things such as servers and all that, and the surveillance that happens and government control of those farms is something that should worry you if you're Kenyan. Even whether that data is necessarily kept here. People talk about, you know, all those other global institutions, Facebook, Amazon, and where they keep the data and all that stuff. I mean, for Chinese data and where it's shared, if the government asks for it, it will be given like this. So those are things that require conversations. And yes, in my view, I think the government of Kenya moved too far. But it doesn't worry, it doesn't surprise me because there's been a burst of autocracy across the African continent. And after last year, you can see from the language of this administration and some of the people, some of them lawyers saying things such as rights are not supposed to be, you see, to start to negotiate our rights with us as opposed to what the Constitution says. This, in my view, is not a good step and Kenyans need to wake up.
And Tom, the statement on interpretation of rights and every country having that, you know, again, it's said in language that seems innocuous enough, that the country will have a debate. But who are we really talking about when we talk about the country, right? And when these statements come out from various people, then it tells us about the significance of actually having a public square that is not mediated by government, that is not controlled by government, that is not this walled garden where if you take one step a little too far, you know, that there's going to be consequences. You know, I mean, Tom, well, you're a fair deal younger than me.
A lot younger.
No,
that you've said it, but yeah, proceed.
I was trying to be diplomatic, my guy. But you know, even you remember or will have heard stories about the nature of surveillance and the cloud of fear that existed from pre-colonial times into colonialism, post-colonially, all the way until we pass this new constitution, Kibaki leaves, etc., a few years before that. And that for me is the big fear. That for me is the big concern, that we are making these very big trade-offs to please or to side, you know, with who's going to be the next big cheese. And those trade-offs are going to be very personal to us. You know, you've done quite a bit in terms of OSINT around the nature of surveillance and coordinated inauthentic behavior. What does this look like to you going forward over the next couple of years?
Well, it obviously doesn't look good. But first, I'd want us to pump the brakes on the China might be... well, China is obviously the bigger evil, if you're looking at it from that perspective. But I'm just asking myself, listening to you...
Evil? Anyway, just explain that.
Well, well, first of all, if you look at the Uyghur Muslims and what's happening there, and a bunch of the extrajudicial killings, people who had disappeared by the Chinese government, that's one thing that you need to be afraid of.
Yes.
And also their hold over Taiwan and their threats to invade Taiwan, which is, I think it's autonomous. It's an autonomous state of it was part of China in history.
Historically.
Yeah, historically it was, but it chose to go away and become autonomous.
Yeah.
If you look at how China is handling that, and you look into Kenya, and that statement, as you've said it, you have freedom to, which is different from how the World Bank and the US would word their statements.
Yeah.
But then I'm asking myself this, from everything that we've had the US government say, everything that the World Bank has said when it gives us loans, does any of that actually hold at the end of the day? If they say human rights are sacrosanct, do they actually mean it? Because when people were murdered last year, just remember seeing a statement from then Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and that was it.
Yeah.
No, they didn't force the government into looking into these murders. And some might argue the murder of Rex and that gentleman being in court is because of that external pressure. But then how much of it actually reaches justice? Very little of it. Over the years, so many people have been murdered, but have you seen it to completion? I've only seen statements from where I sit.
Well, locally, obviously, there's justice for some, and you know, and what passes for justice for others. But you know, this discussion about the role of the United Nations and the Geneva Convention, for instance, and you know, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, etc. This is what is being challenged today, right? So, in Trump's presidency, there was Meta's view that you know, we shouldn't mediate the media, right? Listen to that and compare that with the declaration that human rights should be interpreted by various countries in the way they see fit, and you start to see parallels there. So the multilateral system, in terms of being able to police and create this kind of global architecture for justice, hasn't been perfect. It isn't perfect. It's been used to the disadvantage of countries like ours for decades, right? By the United States, by big countries like China. But it is a system that, by and large, came about, especially when it comes to human rights, out of a consensus on not repeating the harms that we saw in the Second World War, right? Why we are here today with a hot war in Gaza, with a hot war in Ukraine, with autocracy creeping back around the world, tells you something about what happens when leaders, countries, when nations, when people who are in power don't keep their word. Then you erode the trust over time that people have in these institutions, and then now give someone who has nefarious goals or very personalized or very selfish goals a vehicle to be able to then now, you know, step back from this multilateral world. You know, I don't know, Kwame, what your thoughts are on that.
You know, the reason this worries me, for instance, is it doesn't matter what China and its constitution says, because they have a belief, which is also not true, but they have a belief then in non-interference. But when you're a Kenyan, and just 3 weeks ago, we had schoolgirls, 14, 15-year-olds, schoolgirls tear gassed for wanting to perform a play. A play. This is a play by 14, 15-year-olds. Something that we know even our constitution guarantees us that. Right? And then you have a certain country who is now our best buddy, and you know how it treats its own citizens. Then, I mean, we can't say it's a... So, fine, we have no right, we have no... I cannot question how Chinese citizens... I mean, you might say that. You should not question how Chinese citizens would, but in our country, our constitution provides certain rights, which this government has been uncomfortable with. And so we need to look to its friends, and or rather who it chooses as friends, and whether they, if we are to challenge this government, would not send it arms, for instance, to clamp us down. So that's one. Two, many people speak about the US, and it's I mean, democracy can be, it has its rough edges, that's true, that's true. But at least, if you sit here as a Kenyan, you can go into the internet and find out who sits on the committee that addresses African issues in the US. And you can send them an email, whether they respond or not is a different matter. I don't know any Chinese guy whom I could say, look, your government has hidden a contract that they've done with these people, and they've asked us to mortgage ourselves and our grandkids. We are not even asking you to do anything, just ask them to declare that agreement.
Show us a contract.
Yes. So we might say the West, and we might say all manner of things about those differences, and they have their own contradictions. I mean, I'm not going to, but at least there are people we've known how to mediate and work with in ways that could get us some progress made. For the Chinese, I don't think they care.
That's true.
So that's what worries me about them. And their behavior with their neighbors. So it's not just Taiwan, which is a definitely difficult issue, but their neighbors in that East Asian Sea and the Chinese Sea, I mean, around that area, the straits, right, actually fear them. When a guy is feared by his own neighbors out there, why do we think he's going to embrace us here without asking us to pay a cost? So I weigh them. And I'm not one person who's going to say that anybody who pokes the US in the eye should be our friend. I mean, we have to be a bit more circumspect and say, yes, no human beings are perfect, but they are good friends and they are better friends. And in my view, I don't think China is better than the US. So we have to be circumspect and actually be clear about that.
Even if you look at it from that point of view, look at China's friends, Russia. North Korea, the list goes on and on. They don't have the best democratic record out there. Right?
No, they don't. No, they don't. But I like the word circumspect because, as Kwame has said, and as we've discussed here also about America, every country has its own flaws, us included.
Yes.
Our own foreign policy on the continent is something that other Africans are very,
they hate us.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and we can't be there now standing and defending our position with China as being the most strategic or what have you, if there is no real benefit that can accrue. And most especially if we don't even take advantage of the things that are given, the things that are negotiated in these kinds of contracts. But guys, I want us to talk about one last thing before we close today. And it was a statement by a person who previously had not been known to many in the Kenyan public. His name is Tuan Chau, and he's the CEO of Vietnam Gas. And he issued one hell of a reflection on his LinkedIn. I'm just going to read a few statements. So he says, Kenya's real problem is not a lack of money or talent. It's the absence of long-term vision and the dominance of short-term gains. Leaders talk big, but systems don't move. They wait for outsiders to bring business rather than build an environment for it. The biggest indicator, electricity, right? And so he says, Vietnam has 100 million people, over 70 gigawatts of power. Kenya has 50 million people and only 4 gigawatts of installed capacity, right? Talking about it being a foundational issue for economic development, but his parting shot was crazy, right? The global window is closing. Asia isn't waiting. If Kenya and much of Africa want a real economic future, they must turn off the microphone and turn on the power. Kwame, first of all, did you read the statement?
Yes, I read the statement. I mean, when I first saw it, I thought it was one of those general statements that we Africans construct and decide. Somebody said right, those fake memes, Yeah, but I looked it up and someone says it's credible. I think it's true, but the way I would do it is this. Kenya has invested, I mean, and John and some of your colleagues were in the media. Kenya has invested, and the public sector has invested in sharp talk, good talk. And a few people in the professional media, journalist cadre work for government. So they're very good at issuing press statements, right? Very well worded with nice, yes, but their bosses don't work. And that's just true. So that's I don't know that I would agree with him that we lack a long-term vision, because we had a vision 2030 generated under President Kibaki. It's 2000. We are 5 years away from 2030, and in almost all those metrics we are behind. So it wasn't about the vision itself. I mean, we at the IE also have a problem with these long-term visions. They tend to be very socialist documents. You know, China has a 100-year plan. Other people have these 100-year plans.
Africa has Vision 2063.
Yes, Africa Vision 2063 and all that. I don't know that it's the absence of vision, but yes, it's about actually what government works on. So for instance, you know now that the last week was what they call the spring meetings, where the IMF, World Bank call, you know, finance ministers, they issue the reports and a few things get discussed. And it's now come that the IMF is asking government of Kenya, because almost 400 billion, let me say 370 billion, which is 1 billion per day spent in the Ministry of Education, paying teachers. And we at the Institute of Economic Affairs have been asking us, okay, let me just say, so basically what is happening, that money, now the IMF is insisting, because this is the biggest expenditure item in wages, please audit it. Right? So it's a conditionality for government. And I'm asking myself, members of parliament are here every year. They're the ones who sign. Does it have to take somebody sitting in Washington to remind us that there's something fishy about teachers' wages in this country that we need to say? Because if you look at it, Kenya has one of the best teacher-pupil ratios. It says we have 425,000 teachers, 15 million students. So that comes down to 1 to 36. But how many times do you guys in the media go to a school, not even outside Nairobi? You know, people think it has to be a rural area. Even within Nairobi, where you are seeing one teacher teaching 80 kids. What's happening? So he is right. He's right in the sense that we spend too much time declaring, and including sometimes, like you remember 2 weeks ago, nobody less than the president was opening roads that had already been opened by President Kibaki, by President Uhuru, and claiming that we are establishing electricity and the poles were being moved from one center to the other. Did you see that?
Same poles,
so the same poles. So we play these games with ourselves, and yes, just doing basic things. In Nairobi, we are trying to cook 1 million chapatis for kids, which is still fine, but they go home and they wash their hands with contaminated water. And get cholera. Have cholera in Nairobi City.
And it's become almost a perennial thing. We've had cholera outbreaks in 3 out of the past 5 years.
Precisely.
You know, and this
so the absence of basic things. And when you hear what the county government is speaking, they speak of big things when they can't do basic things, and that's usually it. I mean, it's like being in a household and speaking of putting up a big fence and everything else, and you have no walls, for instance. So the prioritization, I think, is what this guy was reminding us of. And you could take it badly or not, but I think they have something to say. That's true.
They certainly
we talk
do.
A big talk, but
they certainly do. And we're speaking about teachers. Remember how big the talk was on hiring 46,000 JSS teachers last year, right? And now that the IMF is asking us to audit our teachers' payroll, it doesn't take much. Sam, who's one of our producers on our WhatsApp group, shared a story about a young lady who had tarmacked for years, got a lot of, got great marks, tarmacks for years, I think goes to check in the credit referencing bureau and finds that she owes 1.8 million shillings in terms of debt, right? And how that occurs is that her identity was stolen. Someone got a job as a teacher. Someone got a job as a teacher using her grades, using her. I haven't personally interrogated this, but that Sam has posted this story. I trust that the source. The source, and went and then took debt, and has left this person who has been tarmacking for years in debt. Can you imagine what that must feel like as a person who's been looking? But more so, it really talks to this question of having big talk, but very, very short on action. And not just short on action, almost malevolent in the way you treat public resources. We all know that now, contracts, teaching contracts, teaching jobs are being handed out
by members of parliament.
Exactly.
In public forums.
In public forums. This is wrong. It is manifestly wrong. And the more we get, I think relating it to the question of debt, the more we get into debt, my concern is really about usage, right? Yeah. And and I guess as a parting shot for my thoughts on the same, Uhuru Kenyatta coming out and talking about the quality of leadership, is again just an exercise in this art of forgetting that I see politicians constantly baiting us to kind of do. Because this man was president no less than 2 years ago, right? These debts didn't come from nowhere. They've been here for 10 years. And that you see people in the shape of Mukome now calling him very clever, talking about that, is just giving fodder to people who are not managing their roles properly to then have a political discussion on what should be about, delivery, service delivery, about management of debt. Why should we even have a case that's being filed in court about ODS debt in our country in this day and age? Tom, look, you looked at, Tom wrote an article last year. Was it last year? No, it was
the year before that.
Kenya One in the Sky.
Oh, yeah, that was 2023.
2023.
I think so,
yeah, about the priorities in terms of President William Ruto's travel.
Yeah.
And the disparities that it showed between the travel and some of the deliveries that we expect of a president like that. If we're going forward and to 2027, right? Kwame and Tom, as we wind up, what then should be on the laundry list of Kenyans in terms of delivery? Right? And I'm asking you this, Tom, but you this, Kwame, as well, because I remember you saying that if Kenyans woke up and government ceased to exist, that there'd be no manifest difference in their lives, right? So for a government that really doesn't make a difference one way or another, what should Kenyans be talking about in this new era where we're now getting into more debt, getting more loans and making more deals? What would be the expectation?
No, come on, please go first.
Okay. So the first thing that one of the things I'd like Kenyans to not normalize is the idea that we only wait for elections moments to see decisive change. Because if we do that, it means that we'll always be deflated. And then we say, okay, let's give them 4 years and then we'll send them out. And that never does. That's one good thing, but it's not efficient. It's not everything. We need more than that. And my view is that we need to maintain pressure on government throughout its life cycle, so that we don't have one government simply telling you that we are better than the other guys. Using grievance against, say for instance, using grievance against Uhuru Kenyatta to get elected. And then when you get elected, you use grievance against perhaps the DP or somebody else. Did you get that? The point is, the business of government is 24 hours. So let's ask ourselves, how do we keep these people on check for 24 hours? And the biggest part is Parliament. I start with the Constitution. This thing called the Constitution, there are two issues that it generated that were extremely important. One was more power and resources, even pastoral resources to members of Parliament, paid extremely well. I can tell you most of those guys would not earn the income. I say this respectfully. They do not earn the income that you and me as taxpayers give them if they are outside Parliament. We have to stop kidding. Those would be the highest wages that they would ever earn in their lives. And because of that, we need them to give us the highest effort they can in their lives as well, because we are giving them a pension too. And we shouldn't be apologetic about that. So Parliament needs to start doing its job. If you think, I actually think that presidential travel by itself is not a big deal. But if you think that presidential travel is too much and you need to control it, in 6 weeks, we'll be discussing the new budget. You chop down that budget without apology. But simply say, look, we don't want 50 trips in a year. You make only 10 trips. Or you simply say you have this X number of shillings, use it as you will, but you cannot be using in a year the equivalent of building 40 schools. You can't. high schools, I'm talking about high schools, you can't. And you simply say, it does not matter. Use virtual communication. They can be extremely secured. We have a military with all that capability. If you need to speak to Xi, you don't have to travel for 5 days. Do you guys get that? We have to force Parliament to force the executive to make the difficult decisions because the executive is not going to change them on its own. Then we come to governance as well. Resources are available here. Kenyans fought because we didn't want everything determined from the central government in Nairobi, right? So at the same time, in addition to making chapatis for Kenyan kids, which you have chosen as the flagship project, I'd rather we chose as the flagship project collecting garbage and not dumping it on another office, for instance. And we don't have to wait until the next election so we can have 5 people debate it. We say, look, we need you to give us a rundown. How many more people have been connected to water today? Do you guys get? I mean, it's a good thing that the governor says we now have an ICU, but don't wait until we are sick in ICU to start giving us services.
Or wait until after the rains to see something.
Precisely.
I was like, my gosh, like of all the ridiculous statements.
We need the water flowing in the taps every day because that's one thing we need to. That's how life is lived. So I think we need to start that pressure. The responsibility of being a citizen, calling to account the officers, is a lifelong one. Because even your taxes, you pay to them every day. Remember, the public sector spends 10 billion shillings every day. From your taxes, whether some of it is borrowed or not, it's still your taxes because we are going to have to pay for it. A guy who's spending 10 billion shillings of your cash every day cannot tell you, how dare you question me? Yes. How dare you question me, or that I am not a madman? I mean, we can't make that choice, but if you're spending money recklessly, we might actually start questioning your sanity. So show us that we have to stop as Kenyans believing that this is a relay, that one bad government gives the other, so the next time we are at the line, making sure that the relay button is passed to the right guys. While they're running, we can tell them to amend their pace so that it's consistent. Don't wait. Every day, don't wait. We have to do that kind of, including saying, look, today, BBC showed us this. We really need to see some government action around this.
Fantastic way of capping it off. Tom, final thoughts.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing, but he's put it in a more, should I say, concise and powerful way. For me, it's always been just speak about the things that matter to you. Speak about the things that matter to you. If the road you use, which is what Hanifa was doing from the beginning, she saw a dumpster where it shouldn't have been, and she made noise about it. And that thing was corrected. So if your kid isn't going to school, shout about it. If GSS isn't working for you, and if there isn't a curriculum yet and you're a parent, all parents should make that thing work. Because it's your job as a citizen to do that. Because at the end of the day, politicians have travel insurance, they have hospital insurance, they have a mortgage that is paid for by you every time you pay your paid salary, and over 30% of it is given to government. And every time you buy a packet of milk, a percentage of that goes to VAT that ends up paying someone. So no one should ever tell you that they're talking down on you, that they know better than you. Because everything that you spend on in this country, you're giving them a piece of it to pay for their mortgage and their hospital insurance, and to take their kids to the best schools in the country when they're wrecking their education system. So make noise about those things that matter to you. And I believe if everyone speaks constantly about the things that they care about, Kenya will be something. Because I hate it, and someone always tells me, someone close to me always tells me that the problem with our voting patterns in Kenya is we vote to punish someone else.
Man, Tom,
you've seen that.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because when you're talking about the things that matter to you, you're actually engaging in the exercise of creating a vision for what your country should look like. And when you make such important decisions to punish someone, all you're engaging in is what? As the Germans would say, Schadenfreude, celebrating the misery of someone else, and that never ends well, right? So like casting a vision for what your country should look like actually starts with these small things, and it starts at that granular level, right? Guys, this has been an awesome conversation. I just want to chime in with some of the comments, because we've got quite a bit of comments that have come through today. So one of them, quite early, Silas Sanyuaston says, thank you. Received greetings from Lotiriman, Leshakwet. These are buddies of ours from a documentary we did in 2016, can you believe? These are pastoralists that Samburu herders that go around different parts of northern Kenya. I hope you guys are well. Thank you for watching. Just to show you how deep internet penetration is today, right? And then, okay, so there are a couple of comments about the quality of the stream today. Unfortunately, there's been some issues with our internet. We've been trying to fix it, but we should come right next week. This episode will be uploaded by tomorrow, and you can watch the full stream because it's a brilliant discussion, right? So Samuel Kimani says, more conversations means increased knowledge and perspective. I guess talking about the quality of this conversation. Then there's SR in brackets, Ruto Billions. This is this is his name. Lived in the US for 25 years. Kenya is way better, but needs massive energy investment, needs to lean on Africa, and needs to cut the West out completely. Cut the West, followed by cutting corruption. Kimani Kenneth says, let's continue having these kinds of conversations. GOK isn't working for ordinary Kenyans. As Nyugush said, we are a country that majors in minor things. Yeah, and let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. The rest are greetings to everybody. I saw our co-host Justine isn't here. I saw her there. Crying emoji saying tunangoja. Justine, come back, get better soon, yes, and we'll have even better quality conversations. But this is where I want us to end it today. Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute for Economic Affairs, thank you for coming through, Kwame. This was really a brilliant discussion from blood parliament and its tie-ins to the economy and our daily lives. Tom, thank you for coming back. Yeah. I see no presents, no gifts from Butere. Surely, the Kenyan tradition that when you go up country, you come back with something. I know. Next time, we have children to feed, and I can't feed them on my salary.
Yeah, I know. This was an impromptu visit anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But welcome back and glad to see you guys. Thank you very much for watching The Big Picture. This podcast happens every week. Every Monday from 6 p.m. we stream live. Obviously, like I mentioned, the quality of the stream will be worked on. But we will be back next week with a great discussion. Meantime, there's two things that I want to remind you of. Title Deals, episode 2 of season 2 runs on Wednesday by 6 p.m. So we'll look out for that. Set your reminder buttons there. And a big shout out to the team at BBC Africa Eye for the work that they did on Blood Parliament. Let's continue having these discussions because these discussions are really what nation building is all about. Nonetheless, my name is John Alanamu. Thank you very much for being with us for this 1 hour. We'll catch you on the next episode. Otherwise, if you haven't listened to this, you can catch us on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. For now, it's goodbye, good evening, good morning from wherever you are. Catch you on the next one. Cheers.
In the next episode,
what were Islands?
Nairobi's old estates are turning into a battlefield.
43 families from Woodley Estate are tonight counting losses.
The county government of Nairobi have the titles for Ofafa Jericho, Jericho Lumumba, Ofafa Maringo, and Maringo or not.
Nani walikaa chini wakasema ianze Jericho?
Tuliahidiwa ya kwamba baada ya miaka 25 hizi nyumba zitakuwa zetu.
Hakukuwa na title deed isipokuwa ni hicho kijikitabu ambacho kilikuwa na maelezo kwa upande wa nyumba.
As plans to demolish these estates gather momentum, who really wins? Who loses? And what is the true cost of redevelopment?
There are a lot of challenges. Key amongst them is a total lack of transparency. Yani ukora ni mingi sana hii Nairobi.
In the next episode,
what were Islands?
Nairobi's old estates are turning into a battlefield.
43 families from Woodley Estate are tonight counting losses.
The county government of Nairobi have the titles for Ofafa Jericho, Jericho Lumumba, Ofafa Maringo, and Maringo or not.
Nani walikaa chini wakasema ianze Jericho?
Tuliahidiwa ya kwamba baada ya miaka 25 hizi nyumba zitakuwa zetu.
hakukuwa na title deed, isipokuwa ni hicho kijikitabu ambacho kilikuwa na maelezo kwa upande wa nyuma.
As plans to demolish these estates gather momentum, who really wins, who loses, and what is the true cost of redevelopment?
There are a lot of challenges. Key amongst them is a total lack of transparency. Yani ukora ni mingi sana hii Nairobi.